Hey guys, welcome to Connor's English Corner, episode 2 for October 30th, 2017. Today, since it is the fifth Monday, actually, of October, we'll be doing a deck review. So the deck that most people wanted me to talk about was KONOSUBA, the Goddess build of the deck. So this is actually a deck that I have not played around with a whole lot prior to this. I've always been more of a fan of the Magic build, but I've been giving it some testing over the last week or so. I've got a list put together that I'll show you guys, and hopefully we can all learn something about this deck. It's actually a lot more interesting of a deck than I figured it would be. Has a couple issues, but has a couple really strong points. So here is the general deck overview. It's a yellow-blue deck. The Goddess cards are primarily blue. I have added a little bit of yellow in for some darkness cards, just because there are some darkness cards that interact really well with a lot of the Goddess cards. So yeah, it focuses on the Goddess trait, obviously. This leads to a couple issues because of some splits between Adventurer support and Goddess support. Thankfully, the Kazumas and Aquas usually refer to both. And I think even the Heiresses check for Adventurer. It's more of an issue with the Darknesses that only check for Adventurer rather than Goddess trait. So the pros to the deck, you're not very reliant on climax combos. I play 2 climax combos in the deck. One of them is an advantage combo at level 1, but it's not something that you need to be fielding multiples of to get your advantage. It's more of just a supplementary thing. And then the level 3 combo is just sort of there because we needed a second climax and we play the level 3 anyway. So the biggest part of this deck that I like is that it has very strong level 2 plays. You have 2 different early play level 3s that are both very powerful. And not many decks in English can actually deal with it. So I'll show those off more when we get to them, but the deck's main focus is going to be its level 2 game. You have a couple good utility cards. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing super strong, but you have some good utility. And something that I think is really big right now in an Attack on Titan focused meta is that you never really need to reverse your opponent with any of your cards. So you really don't care about AOT much. It's still going to give you some trouble, but errands aren't just going to completely shut you down. So some cons is, since you're early playing a lot of level 3s, it's going to take some stock to do that, so you're never really going to pile up on a whole lot of stock once you hit level 2. Which is why most of our game is costless early, so that we can build that stock to play a bunch of level 3s. Your main finisher is, I guess, so it's inconsistent. It's not like you have a high chance of hitting it, but you can never guarantee it. There's just about no way to actually guarantee that your finisher is going to go off, and you have to pay the cost before you use the effect. So sometimes it just feels really bad because you discard a bunch of cards and don't get anything out of it. And then since we're in yellow-blue, there are a couple of red cards and cards that check for only magic trait that we aren't going to have access to, and some that check for adventurer or don't check for trait at all. But since they're in red, we just don't have room for them in the deck. So that's sort of an issue this deck has. It's just a lot of the good utility in the set, a lot of the better utility, we just aren't going to get to play. So here's my list. This is what I've been testing lately. It's been working actually really well. The biggest issue is just that the inconsistency in your finisher effect. So I've got what I think is going to be a decent format for going through these. I'm still playing around with it, seeing as this is the first deck discussion I've done on here, but I'm just going to go through the cards one by one that I've got listed here. I'll show their effects on screen, and I'll just sort of talk about what they do in the context of the deck. If you want to read the effect, you can pause the screen, read it. You probably have time to read it while I'm talking. So here we go. First up is Lots of Anxiety Kazuma. So he's our level 0 yellow. He's a brainstormer. We don't play the climax for his climax combo, so that text is pretty irrelevant. but he has a Rest 2 Search Brainstorm. Most decks you would play more than 2 of your Search Brainstormer. In this deck, we have 2 different Brainstorms that we're playing, so I'm really only just playing 2 Kazuma, because sometimes you want the Search. A lot of the time, you really just don't actually care. If he was Goddess trait, I'd play more. Our level 1 combo requires Goddess trait on board, which is why I'm playing more of the Aqua Brainstorm than Kazuma. But Kazuma is just a Search Brainstorm for Adventurer and Goddess, so he can grab any card in the deck, which is nice. Yeah, that's just about it. He's yellow, so he's also yellow color fix for a couple Darkness cards. Next, we have Special Talent is Fantasizing Darkness. So this is what's usually referred to as a Takitsubo clone, with its second effect, Act, pay 1, rest it, and put the top card of your deck into your clock. You can search your deck for one Adventurer character, reveal it to your opponent, put it in your hand, shuffle your deck. It's not limited to level 1 or lower, like the normal Ricky effect, and it's repeatable every turn. Though you can't attack with it the turn you use it, obviously, so that is a downside sometimes. The biggest issue with the effect, though, is that it only grabs Adventurers, so we can use it to grab almost anything in our deck, just not the Eris cards. So there's like 3 cards in the deck that we can't get with it, but usually not a big issue. And then its other effect is when we play a Climax, we can give a character 1,000 power. So this is nice, just because we can get some reverses with our characters on offense. The third card we have is Model Knight Darkness. So it's a global 500 to Adventurer. Once again, we aren't boosting our Erises, unfortunately. But you win some, you lose some. We just gotta take what we got. The second effect has enough useful applications in the deck that I think the card is worth it regardless. There are a lot of just cool things you can do with the deck that I'll sort of go into more detail as we get to the cards that it works with. But it's rest the card, choose another character. You can choose yours or your opponent's, and give it plus a level until the end of your opponent's next turn. So worth noting, the actual printed version of the card says choose one of your other characters, but there is an errata on the card. It can choose your character or your opponent's. So you can do some neat stuff with the card. You can change levels, so you can side attack for more precise damage, stuff like that. Next, this is our only red card in the deck, or I take that back, there's one of our 2 red cards in the deck. It's a Megumin. It's not Goddess, but it's a good enough card that it's a 4 of in here, just because we need a plussing 0, and this is the best one, in my opinion, that we have access to. So it's a free runner. At the beginning of your opponent's attack phase, you can move it to any open slot in your front row. So if you open with it, it's usually going to live its first turn, and just give you something to attack with multiple times. Its other effect is when you play it from stage to hand, you can discard a Climax. If you do, salvage an Adventurer or Magic. The only Magic cards in the deck are Adventurers anyway, and again, unfortunately, you can't use it to grab Erises. So the Eris cards are just kind of a little sad in the deck, but most of our Goddess cards are Aqua, as you can see. We've only got like 3 Erises in the deck, so it's not a huge issue. It's also nice since we're running Pants Trigger Climaxes, or Gates, that allow you to add Climaxes back to hand. This can turn those into characters instead of Climaxes. So now we have 3 copies of the Aqua Brainstorm, Troublemaker Aqua. It is a rest self Brainstorm. You pay 1, rest it. Mill 4, for each Climax that you reveal, you choose a cost 0 or lower in Waiting Room and play it to your stage. So this is how we're going to be getting a lot of our early game characters, is just mashing Brainstorm. You can just summon stuff to your board, even after it keeps dying. Worth noting is also that if you use this at level 0, you can summon level 1s down. If you can summon like a 107k, that's usually going to stick around. Or worst case scenario, you just play down like a 1-0 Aqua that mills on death. Like, you can just play cards. It's a plus. It's not super selective, which is an issue, but it's a plus. It lets you hold cards in your hand, because a lot of our effects will discard later in the deck. So it lets you hold cards in your hand and still fill your board. And like all of our level 1s are costless anyway, so we basically just summon any level 1 we want. And it also gives our front middle character Encore, where we can discard a character for it. It's only relevant for a couple of characters in the deck, but it's not trait restricted or anything, so just whatever we have in front middle gets Encore, which is neat. Next we have Significance of Killing Snow Sprite Aqua. This isn't a card I'd normally play for, but one of our early play level 3s requires that we play this card, so I've got it at 4. It's basically a costless hand filter. When you play it from hand to stage, you can put a card from hand into clock to search for a goddess character. So you can only search goddess. You can't search darkness, and you can't search your Megumins. But you can search your Aquas and your Heiresses. So this is one of the cards that can get us Heiresses. It's not something you're going to use super often, but it's a 2500 beater, worst case scenario. And best case scenario, you can search out any one of your level 1s, really. Yeah, it's not a plus, but we can still use it to like push ourselves to level 1 by clocking and stuff like that. Next, we're playing one copy of Shaken Megumin. This is a level 1 backup. It is 1000. It's a 1000 backup, and when we use the backup, we can discard 2 to choose one of our opponent's characters with a higher level than our opponent and put it into our waiting room. So it's an anti-change effect. So this is neat because our Darkness Global can rest to give levels through our opponent's turn. So you can actually use this sort of as a pseudo anti-damage late game. If you just rest a Darkness and give one of your opponent's characters +1 level to make it like a level 4, then when your opponent goes to attack, you can anti-change it, which is really neat. That's just one of the weird interactions that the Darkness Global has, and I think it makes this card worth running. There do have to be a couple of things that line up for that to actually work out for you. The character that you give the level to has to live, and you need a full board, so your opponent doesn't just direct attack you and dodge counter step. But we have stuff that gives character Encore, so it's possible. It's possible to get there. Otherwise, it's just an anti-change counter. It threatens your opponent's early plays, makes them think twice about playing them. Alright, so we have our level 1 Climax combo, Gentle Smile Eris. When you play a Climax, she gains 1500, so she swings relatively large on offense. It's 7k with her Climax. And when you play her Climax, which is the book, you can choose if she's in your front row, and you have another goddess character, which this is why we play more of the Aqua Brainstorm than the Kazuma, because that can count as a goddess on our board. You can choose a cost 0 or lower adventurer or goddess in your waiting room and play it to your stage. So this is another way that we're just using sort of our waiting room to field characters instead of our hand, so we can hold cards in our hand. Normally you're just going to summon another level 1 Aqua. Yeah. So here's the Climax. It is a book, global 1k1. Pretty normal. Alright, so this is probably your main summon target for the Climax combo. Sacred Create Water Aqua. Just a 105k, and when she goes from stage to waiting room, you can reveal up to 3 cards from the top of your deck. If you reveal at least 1, you choose an adventurer or goddess, so you can grab anything in the deck, put it in your hand, put the rest in the waiting room, and then discard 1. So this acts as a costless hand filter, and it has really nice synergy with our level 1 combo and our Brainstorm. Since it doesn't activate on play, it activates on death. We can summon it from waiting room and still get the effect once it dies. This also just acts as mill and sort of deck control. It's one of our main ways of hand sculpting in the deck, since we don't really have a lot of other ways to like search costlessly. So this is going to be our main sort of hand sculpting. Alright, and we play 3 copies of Sacred Turn Undead Aqua. This is a 107,000, so it's a really big 1-0. It has 2 demerits. It can't frontal attack a character that's a higher level than it, and when it reverses its battle opponent, you have to send it to your opponent's memory. It's not optional, so you have to send it. It gives your opponent a little bit of compression, but at the same time, you can use it to deny things like, in Kantai, you can deny like Inazuma's so they can't search off of Inazuma. You can send Rens in Tolaveru to memory so they can't search. It gives your opponent compression, but there's a couple of things you can remove. You can remove Encore characters. It's also on defense. If your opponent crashes into you, their character goes to memory. So you just remove characters. You don't really want to send too many to memory because then your opponent starts getting good compression. But it's not a downside that's like actively doing a lot to hurt you. So it's not too bad. It's not like a downside that clocks you or something like that. She's also just big. If you can summon one of these out at level 0 with the Brainstorm, it's probably going to stick around. It's usually nice to have one on board at level 1 too, just because your opponent does have to actually like try to get over it, and we do play a couple backups. So we do play one copy of the Real Goddess Aqua, just to have a second backup at level 1. This one's just a vanilla 1500 backup. But it's big enough to protect your 107Ks and stuff like that, and our early plays. I play backups just because we have relatively large things that we want to protect. So here's another backup at level 2, Standing Tall with Arms Wide Open Darkness. This is a 2-1 backup, so you'd have to pay 1. It's a 25, but if you have an adventurer, you give your battling character an extra 1000 power. It doesn't require your character in battle to be an adventurer, so you can play the backup for an heiress and still save it. Before I move on, one other thing about the Sacred Turn Undead that I forgot to mention. It can't frontal attack higher level characters, but your Darkness Global can give the Aqua more levels. So you can use the Darkness Global to make the Aqua a level 2 or a level 3, and then you can still frontal attack into those levels, which is good. I forgot to mention that when we were there. So then we have Being Shy Eris. Is a 2-1-55. The first effect isn't super relevant, but it exists. It's on play, pay 1, discard 2 to choose a character in your waiting room with level lower than or equal to your level and play it to your stage. It's kind of a really hefty cost. Like, you can get level 3s out for 1 stock when you're at level 3, but discarding 2 usually isn't something you want to do to bring them out. Thankfully, most of our level 3s don't have, like, on-play from hand effects. So we can bring out level 3s, and there's not really, effect we're missing by doing that, which is neat. We're mainly playing the card for its second effect, though. When it becomes reversed, if the level of the card's battle opponent is higher than your opponent's level, you can put the battle opponent on the bottom of your opponent's deck. So it's another anti-change bomb. This is mainly here for, like, the mirror. Since Darkness level 3 can't be anti-changed by our backup, we have to remove it with the Eris. There's also, with the Darkness Global, again, you can rest it to give your opponent's characters levels and then bottom deck them. So even at, like, level 3, you can give your opponent's character a level and then bottom deck it, just to remove it from board. So yeah, there's some neat interactions you can do with that. The card's mainly just here for, like, hex-proof early plays and stuff, so we can just get rid of them. Alright, so then we have 3 copies of the Darkness level 3, this giant wall of text card. So it has 4 effects. The first is that if your opponent has a level 3 or higher character, this gets -1 level while in your hand. So, obvious synergy with Darkness Global. You can just rest it, give your opponent's characters extra levels, and then play the Darkness level 3 down. Oftentimes, your opponent will just have, like, a level 1 on the board, and you just bump it up to level 3, and then summon your Darkness down. Which is really, really nice. A lot of other characters that have this early play condition don't really see play, because they're just too reactive, and don't really do enough to be worth it. Whereas the Darkness you can play proactively, just by forcing your opponent to have level 3s on the board. Second effect, if you have 2 or more other adventurer characters, which is normally going to happen, because you don't have any back row heiresses, so as long as you have a back row, you're going to have 2 adventurers. This gains 1500 power, and the ability, This card cannot be chosen by your opponent's effects. So your opponent cannot anti-change it with backups. They can't bounce it with a wind. Thank goodness, because Tolaveru and AOT both play winds right now. Yeah, they just can't do anything to it, really. The only ways to remove it are going to be by reversing it and by anti-change bombs that just remove it from board, which not a lot of sets have. That's why we're playing the 2/1 Eris, so we can deal with this card in the mirror. The only other sets that really have access to these are Fate, Bang Dream, and Attack on Titan, and maybe like one other set that I'm forgetting. So not a whole lot. Third effect helps it stay alive even more. The beginning of your opponent's draw phase, if this is in front row, choose a character and give it 4,000 power. It can choose itself if you just want it to stick around. You can pump something else if your opponent already can't beat your darkness. Because a lot of decks just don't play level 2s right now, so if you summon this while your opponent's at level 2, then they might just have to field level 1s, and then you can pump one of your other level 1s, like your 7,000 power Aqua. You can bump it up to 11,000, and then they might have 2 lanes that they can't kill. Which is really good. And then the last effect is during this card's battle, when the damage you receive is not cancelled, you can pay 2, discard 1, to deal the same amount of damage to your opponent. So this is really threatening at level 3 if you field like 2 darknesses and push your opponent to where they're within lethal range. Every attack that they do against you could just end up killing them, which is really scary. Like, it's really annoying trying to figure out just how to swing into darknesses to where you can kill your opponent but not kill yourself, which is just great. And this deck can start pushing damage really early, because of its like a lot of early plays. We have 2 soul beaters, stuff like that, so we can push our opponent to level 3 fairly quickly once we start getting our characters down, and then they're just gonna be really scared to attack, I guess. They kind of have to attack because that's how they win the game. And if they get unlucky, they just eat their own damage and lose. Alright, and then we have Blessed with Kind Encounters, Eris. This is our other early play. It gets -1 level if we have the Significance of Killing Snow Sprites, Aqua, and Clock, which is the level 0 clock a card from hand to search. So that's the main reason we're playing 4 copies of that card, is just so we can have it in our clock more often. And then, so the Eris is on play. You can choose an adventurer or goddess in your waiting room and return it to your hand. So as long as you just have 1 Eris, you can clock the Aqua, play an Eris, salvage another Eris, play it, salvage a darkness, play that, or whatever. You can chain your early plays because of the salvage on play, which is really good. It's a way that you can get your ideal board set up, even with the sort of lack of selective advantage that the deck has, since most of our effects are just drawing, or just like sort of holding our cards in hand. All we have to do is get this 1 Eris, and we can grab whatever else we need. And then the last effect is, so this is our main finisher in the deck. This is pretty much the biggest reason that I'm not a huge fan of the deck. Is this effect: once per turn, when your character in the middle position of front row attacks, pay 1, ditch 2, then reveal the top card of your deck. If it's an adventurer or goddess, stand this card. Most cards in your deck are adventurer or goddess. 42 of them, in fact. The only ones that aren't are your 8 climaxes. But if you're playing the game right, you're probably compressing your deck fairly well, and you're sitting on like a 1 in 3, 1 in 4 chance that you just miss and don't get to restand. And that is a problem, because 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 times missing, you just lose a stock, you lose 2 cards in hand, you trigger the climax because it's when your character attacks, and you just don't get anything out of it. And if you're relying on this effect to kill your opponent, and then you just don't get it, really sucks. Really sucks. So I try to sort of stay away from using this. I just sort of field it to get the salvage effect. If I'm in a good enough spot that it doesn't matter that I miss, I'll go ahead and restand. Oftentimes you can do it as soon as you hit level 2 and start fielding these things. You'll have the hand coming out of level 1 that you can ditch to and just try to push damage. And if your opponent hasn't refreshed yet or is just like about to hit their first refresh, you can usually get a good chunk of damage through, which is nice. Um, Usually I'm just gonna sit these on the board though and focus on fielding darknesses, since they're more consistent. They're gonna stay around more. Eris is only 9,500 power, doesn't get power from our globals, though you can put 4,000 on her from darkness, which makes her 13.5, which is good. But yeah, the finisher effect I'm just not a huge fan of. I can't recommend like going hard on it and relying on it to kill your opponent. So next we have the Aqua, level 3. So this one is your opponent can't play backups from their hand, which I guess is kind of relevant. There's a couple of backups you don't want your opponent playing. It doesn't stop events, however, which if it stopped events, that would have been really good, because then you could block the darkness counter, the Tolaveru anti-damage. You could block maneuver gears, I guess. I'm not really sure that's relevant, but you could block maneuver gears. You could block rest counters, stuff like that. But blocking backups, at least you can guarantee you're going to kill your battle opponent. Second effect is on play. You can pay 1. It says your opponent. Okay, so your opponent chooses 2 climaxes in your opponent's waiting room. Returns all cards in your opponent's waiting room except those cards into your opponent's deck, and your opponent shuffles his or her deck. So basically, what happens is you take 2 climaxes. Well, your opponent takes 2 climaxes out of their own waiting room, and then shuffles everything else back into their deck. So generally, that means they're going to be basically forced to refresh with a lot worse compression than they would have had otherwise. Imagining your waiting room is probably something like 6 climaxes and 20 cards just sitting in your waiting room. If you take those out and you're sending back 4 climaxes in 20 or in 18 cards, I guess, you're sending back a lot of damage that they're going to take, and not as many climaxes as they would get otherwise. Ideally, you do this when your opponent only has like 2 climaxes in the waiting room and nothing else. Well, not nothing else, but like 2 climaxes and a bunch of characters. You can take the 2 climaxes out, and just a bunch of damage goes into their deck. That's just clean damage. And then you can use that with the restander and stuff like that to just push a bunch of damage, and hopefully your opponent just takes all of it. Because of the nature of the effect, it just sends cards back into your opponent's deck and decompresses them. Yeah, they could still just cancel everything. And that's one of the issues, which is sort of like the inconsistency of your finishing effects in this deck. But it's the best we've got. It generally, if you can time it well, will have enough impact to be worth it. Last effect is a climax combo. When you play Resurrection to your climax area, if Aqua's in your front row, you can discard 1 to play an Adventurer or Goddess from your clock to your stage. So it's effectively a heal. So a lot of times at level 3, you can just field an Aqua, play the climax, summon like an Eris or a Darkness out of your clock, and their effects will still be active, since their like big effects don't need on play from hand. You can just summon them from the clock and still get your restand or still get your burn on the opponent's turn or whatever. So that's kind of nice. And there's like not really any other climaxes to play in Goddess, so we kind of just play the climax anyway, and we play the level 3 anyway, so it works out. So the climax is a gate trigger, so it lets you add climaxes from discard back to hand. And the last card we've got is the Goddess Who Governs Water Aqua. This is the trial deck level 3. We're just playing 1 because it heals on play, and it's the only card that heals on play that we've got in Goddess. So it's just there for those scenarios where you really just need to heal. And it gains 500 power for each other Adventurer or Goddess, so it's usually like 11,000, 11,500, which is decent power. It's just there to heal, really, though, which is why we've only got 1 copy. You can hopefully grab it if you need it. Alright, so then, past the deck, there's a couple of cards I didn't include in the deck, that are worth considering. I just didn't, like, have room for them, or know where to fit them in, but, first we have the Gentle Goddess Eris. So this is a level 0. On play, you can give an adventurer or goddess 1,000 power. Doesn't really matter a whole lot since you don't need to reverse at any point, but it can help you just get those reverses, just to kill your opponent's characters. And the other effect actually works really well with the Eris level 1 combo. When you play a climax, you can return Eris to your hand, draw 1, discard 1. So you can resolve this before you resolve the Eris combo, so that this can count as your goddess on the stage. And then you can return the Eris to your hand. Well, actually, okay, so you have to, if you do that, if this is your only other goddess, you have to resolve the level 1 combo first in order to meet the condition of having a goddess. Otherwise, if you do have a third goddess on board, you can return this to hand, draw 1, ditch 1, and then play your character from waiting room to the slot where this Eris was. So you can play it to give power and then bounce it back, summon to that slot. Next turn you can play it to give more power. And the draw ditch just gives you hand filtering, which is pretty good. Lets you you can discard a card from hand that you want to summon with the climax combo or whatever. Then we have Covered in Snot Aqua. So this one doesn't. It gives you stock. When it gets reversed, you put the top 2 cards of your deck into your waiting room. If one of those cards was level 2 or higher, you can put it into your stock. Or you can put this card into your stock. So it doesn't really build advantage for you, which is why I'm not playing it, since that's the main thing I felt like the deck needed. But if you ever feel like you want extra stock in the deck, you can play this. It's fairly consistent on giving you stock, just since you get to mill 2 instead of 1. Then we have Providing Magic Aqua. So this is a really good card, and one that I really wanted to include in the deck, and just ended up not having room for. You can probably drop a backup or the anti-change Eris Bomb or something like that for it if you want to play this. The first effect doesn't matter at all because we don't play Crimson Demon Megaman, so I'm not going to bother reading that. Second effect, however, all of your other adventurer or goddess characters get plus 500 power and encore. Put a character from your hand into your waiting room. So this gives your Eris restanders and your Darkness early plays and everything like that character encore. So they're just even harder for your opponent to get rid of. This is especially relevant with the Eris level 3, the early play, since she's rather small. So having character encore lets you keep her around a little longer. Next, we have Carefree Moodmaker Aqua from the trial deck. If you don't want to play the runner, or if you just want an extra plussing level 0, this is probably your best option. If the number of cards in your hand is 6 or more, this gains plus 1500 power. So it's a relatively conditionless 4000 power character. Early game, you're not really playing a bunch of cards anyway, so it can be 4000 power. It can stick around. It can get you an attack or 2, hopefully 2, maybe 3. Depending on how level 0 goes, and just sort of acts as either an alternative or just a supplement to the runner, if you want more pluses at level 0. And then we have Pride of a Goddess Aqua. It's the last card. It doesn't give encore like the other level 2 Aqua, but it gives more power. It's a level assist, so your early plays it'll give 1500 to. You can use the Darkness Global and rest it to give another level. So you can make your Darkness level 3 a level 4, and Aqua's giving it 2000 power now. And since the level lasts through the opponent's turn, so will the power. So you'll still get that power on defense. And its other effect is on play, you can put a card from hand to waiting room to look at up to 4 from the top of your deck. Choose an adventurer or goddess, add it to hand, discard the rest. So it's just sort of like the Winter Akatsuki effect. It's not as great on this card since it is costed, but if you're going to play the card as a level assist anyway, it just gives you another nice hand filtering option. If you really need to, you can play this down in order to check top 4 to try to find your early plays. Not something I'd try to rely on doing, but in the scenario where you need it, it is an option. It can also put more cards into your waiting room for your Eris early play to salvage from, which probably is relevant. So yeah, That's about all for the other options cards. The Goddess card pool just isn't very large to begin with, and even out of that, not a lot of them are great. There's just lots of like vanillas at level 1 and 106,000s and stuff like that. They just aren't really worth playing, in my opinion. So that's about it. And I didn't want to go like too deep into the other colors, just since I was requested to review the Goddess deck, so I want to try to keep it just as close to a good Goddess build as possible. Even if some of the other traits might make it a little better. I will probably cover the Magic deck at some point, or just a generic Adventurer deck. But, yep. So, here's a look at the deck list again. Mostly blue, a little bit of yellow. I try to fit enough in for color fixing. The deck runs really well. Your level 2 pressure is just insane. Like, if you hit level 2 and just feel like, even if you just feel like 1 Eris, 1 Darkness, most decks in English are going to have a hard time dealing with that. Sometimes you're even able to field 2 Darknesses, and those just aren't going away. Like, you go into your opponent's turn and you have like 2 15k walls. Like, no, nothing can get rid of that. So, it's really nice. And Darkness, honestly, so like, Eris seems to be like the finisher of the deck, but I would honestly try to focus more on Darkness, and just threatening the burns on your opponent's turn, as your main finishing ability. Just because it's something a little more consistent. Not that you don't want to use Eris, but again, I wouldn't go around just trying to like spam Eris everywhere. Overall, though, the deck works really well. I can see why as many people have been playing it as they have. I'd always wondered why more people didn't play like the Magic build over Goddess. But I do now see the appeal of Goddess. The level 2 game is just really dominant and something that English can't handle very well. So yeah, thanks for watching. This has been Connor for Connor's English Corner on Strictly Broken. Next week I will be doing another deck discussion. So leave comments on what deck you want to see me talk about next week, so I can go ahead and start getting that put together. And yeah, thanks for watching. Comment, subscribe, all that. I will see you guys next week.